My name is Ian and welcome to Planted, my gardening channel. Now in this video I want to talk about growing plants in pots in the summer. We all get very excited by late spring, early summer, buy plants, put them in pots. But if you go 6 weeks forward to where we are now, which is the end of July, I've got some examples that I want to share with you. First up is this geranium pot that I have in my little courtyard. And the geranium pot was planted earlier in the spring from plants that I had overwintered. But you can see here that there's no new flower production. The plant has gone to seed in that I didn't pick off the old seed pods, and it switched off flower production. But there's also something else I want to point out. You can see how it's more shaded. So the physiology of the plant has changed. Shaded, less sunlight, and it's also gone into seed production. This has the effect of the plant thinking that fall is coming and it's time to shut down and go into dormancy. In a moment I'm going to talk about this tomato plant because it's got some very good pointers that help explain what I want you to better understand. But let's just go and look at this next pot. This is a beautiful gardenia. It has the most amazing fragrance. And this plant is thriving. As you can see, it's a good sized pot. But I've got it in dappled shade. A lot of plants can take full shade, bright sunlight, but the level intensity of when you plant in late May or even early June is much different from the heat that we get in July, which is where we are now. So just because a plant thrives when you put it out doesn't mean that it can take those conditions for the entirety of the summer. I had this gardenia growing beautifully outside, and then I could start in full sun, and I could start to see that it was starting to get scorched. So I placed it under this tree, and the tree gave just enough relief from bright sunshine for it to put out these beautiful flowers. And we cut them, bring the flowers inside, and that's where it can share its beautiful fragrance with us. So let me give you the absolute key steps. I'm at a friend's house, and this is her tomato plant. And in the past she'd said that she'd had difficulty getting the plant to reliably grow in her garden. Now, I said, look, the easiest thing to do is get a large size container, which we have here, get some really good growing medium and plant it, but do not let it dry out. And that's exactly what she did. And she's delighted with the growth. And as you can see, we've got tomatoes coming. When this is planted, and we put this in this container, I would think late May, probably early June. This was the size of the plant that was put in. Obviously it had no flowers on it, but this was the size. And we put that in this container, and of course it would do very well. The amount of growing medium in ratio to the size of the plant, this could hold a huge amount of water based on the size of this plant. Now tomatoes are one of the faster growing plants. They put out huge foliage, very thick wiry stems. Hopefully we get the fruit that we like. So what's happened now in just a few weeks, the ratio of the growing medium to the size of the plant has changed dramatically. We are in an exposed area, so wind will blow across this plant, sucking out a huge amount of water. And what it means is that you plant it in late May or early June, and the water demand is quite low because the plant's quite small. And we tend to forget that as the plant grows, the water demand doesn't just double or even treble. It could be many, many times that. And the risk is that for 1 day or 2 days, it might be too dry, and then it goes into stress. And that's what you see here, this discoloring on the lower half of the plant. It's saying, this plant, these leaves have done their job. I'm going to put what water I have and what nutrients I have up to this new growth. This is what I want to grow. It will sacrifice that. So this plant has done a number of things. It's taking up and releasing so much water that it's not being able to be kept properly moist, properly dry, properly watered. And the best example I can give of this is if you have a large cup and you have a small straw and you drink from it, you can only drink at a certain pace. Now you put a straw in there that's much bigger and you start drinking and you see the rate that water will decrease out of that cup. This plant is a really big straw, sucking out a huge amount of water. And this is the problem with pots. They're great in March, April, May, early June, but once you get into summer with breeze, sunlight, and an increased foliage, they can easily dry out. And this is why I don't have a lot of pots in my garden, because they really are a pain in the height of summer. Dry out for a day, and they start to go south pretty quickly. So if you can, you should get your plants in the ground. It's a much more stable growing environment, and only have a few choice plants that you want to grow into a pot that maybe overwinter in a basement, or if they're lucky, overwinter in a greenhouse. In my garden, I've got 5 containers that I water, and they get watered almost every single day. And I don't water them once, I actually water them twice. Go around and do a loop, get some water on them, let that soak in, and then by the time I've done the other 4 and I come back to that first one, it then gets a second drink. And in speaking to my friend that's growing this, she said, well, how much water should it get? And I explained, it's not the volume of water, it's the duration to access of water. Now this sounds very pedantic, but if you added a gallon of water to this and you had it on a drip with a hose or a watering can or some other device, that 1 gallon would be sufficient to rehydrate the entire root ball. If you turn it on with a hose and blast it with a gallon's worth of water, it will run over the edges, it will run down the sides, and only a small amount of it will get to the root ball. Now, not only is this plant dried out, it's also devoid of feed. It needs even more food. The special tomato food you can get, cannot recommend it enough. And we really want all of these trusses, of which there are a significant amount, to ripen. And really, I think perhaps the best way to describe it is a bit like holding your breath. You can breathe in and out, in and out. But if you have to hold your breath for, say, 5 minutes, you just can't do it. Well, with a plant, if it's got one day where it's stressed with high evaporation, high foliage, wind blowing over it, this container will dry out in a heartbeat. There's a big move to containers, and I understand it, but the ongoing care, I think, is often misunderstood and overlooked. And finally, just to make this point as black and white as possible, the most common question I get asked is, how much water do I need to give my plant? And what people want is, they need a gallon a week, or twice a week, or once a month. Some definitive amount of water that means that it's not their fault if the plant dies. And what I've learned to say is, don't let the plant dry out. So water it as much as it needs, as long as the plant doesn't dry out. Now this plant needs water every single day, and even that might not be enough to keep it on the dry side because of this huge foliage above. So that's my advice for you. Grow limited plants in pots. Look for cues that the plants are thriving. The geranium is suffering because I didn't deadhead it, and it is shaded. The gardenia is thriving because it's the right environment, and I don't let it dry out. And this tomato plant, which is a really good plant to start with in learning how to grow plants in pots, will give you all the cues that you need. Now, there's nothing better than picking fresh tomatoes. I've been in the States a long time, and I still can't say tomato, so I stick with tomatoes. I hope that's all right. So let's just recap. Don't mistake success early in the year, that is April, May time, that your plant is set. As it grows, it will dry out dramatically. And don't forget now, here we are in the end of July, the clocks have changed, the day length is getting shorter, and that's a surefire signal for the plants to start preparing for shorter seasons. This plant needs watering every day, it needs more fertilizer, and one of the ways to reduce transpiration is actually to pick out some of the foliage. You might say, well, that's silly, the plant needs the leaves. This plant will not miss a beat. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.